You spend a lot of time at work. It's a place that a lot of your waking hours in a day are there. And so as a result, it's an important place, and it's hopefully a place that you're not miserable, you know? I know that does happen. Sometimes people are miserable in their workplace, and I would also say this, sometimes just as a responsible adult, isn't it okay that sometimes we're maybe not all that comfortable in a workplace because we're doing what we need to do, taking care of things, taking care of ourselves, maybe taking care of other family members, and by doing that. And so sometimes that's okay, but I don't think it's a good idea probably to be in a work situation where for a lifetime, or at least for a really lengthy time, where we're really uncomfortable. I've known of people who have actually taken major pay cuts before because of wanting to do something that was a little more meaningful to them. So the workplace is a wonderful opportunity. If you spend most of your time in the daytime hours, or you may work night shift, but most of your waking hours in a place, then what is extremely important is for you to realize that God has a plan for you there too. And it is a plan to earn money and to pay your bills and take care of your family and that kind of thing, but it's more than that. It's also probably one of the best mission fields God will ever put you on in your life. You could travel the globe, but where you spend the majority of your time is always an opportunity for God to use you. And so I want us to look at your sheets. If you got one near you there, pick it up. And we're not going to read that entire scripture this morning at the top because we've read it now 2 Sundays in a row. We are going to read just a section of it and begin with halfway through verse 19. Actually, I'll just pick up at verse 19 and we'll go from there. It says that God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. So God is reaching out to other people to reconcile them to God through us. He's giving us this ministry of reconciliation. And the term ambassadors, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, is how Paul declares it. Now, we know that ambassadors for the United States live in different countries around the world, and they represent our nation there. And those ambassadors, for many people who may never travel to the United States that are in government officials in that country, that person represents the United States to them. So oftentimes what they think about the United States, how they feel about the United States, is how they feel about that ambassador, how they think about that person. And I just want to tell you that I believe most people form their opinion about God and about his kingdom by the people they meet that are ambassadors of Christ in his kingdom. That's how they form their opinion. Most of the time, people don't straight out have a discussion. Let's just say you meet somebody that's conflicted about their faith. Oftentimes, if you ask that person, they're not going to say something along the lines of, well, God did this or he did that, and sometimes people will. But most of the time, they're going to say, well, have you ever invited somebody to church and they use this term? Well, the church is full of hypocrites. Anybody ever heard someone say that before? Anybody ever said that? No, you probably, I'm sure somebody has here. The church is full of hypocrites. And you know what? When someone says that to me, I said, I agree with them. You're exactly right. You ought to meet all the hypocrites in our church. I don't say it like that, but anyway, yes, I say, I agree. Because most of us that consider ourselves believers are having a hard time living up to God's standard. And we don't mean to be hypocritical, but sometimes we are, and sometimes it's, but what I do say, now I don't say this to everybody, but I do say is, what we really do need in our church is a good example of how not to be a hypocrite. So if you wouldn't mind coming and being that star for us, we would love to have you come. And I know that's sarcastic or whatever, but if I know somebody well enough, then I could say that and just kind of would go on from there. But I do think that the number one deterrent to people being interested in following Christ and being connected to Christ often is Christians themselves. And that's not how it's supposed to be. How it's supposed to be is that people are drawn to Christ, to being reconciled with Christ, because of meeting somebody who has been reconciled with Christ and actually wanting in on it. It's such a good thing that they want in on it. And so I think the question really is, how do in our workplace, at least the question I'm presenting for us today, the answer is, how in our workplace can we actually be a draw of people to Christ rather than them somehow pushing back away from it because of us? And so instead of maybe looking at it from a standpoint of going, well, this is the kind of information you need to tell the people you work with, or these are the kinds of regulations you need to give the people who you work with, or this is how you would present the gospel to them. I'm going to talk about how you are the gospel. You are an ambassador of the gospel. You represent the gospel. And so, truthfully, more than the words you say, how you live your life is really ultimately the drawing card or not to whether that person is drawn to Christ. Now, over the years, I have had the wonderful opportunity of knowing some individuals, and some here and some in other places, who in their workplace were a force for God. And by that, I don't mean that they stood on their desk and preached to everybody in their office, or on the construction site or something else. But there was a trail of people who worked with it, that their lives were changed. And one of the persons that was a guy that I pastored in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Now, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, well, let's not go to football today, okay? Let's stay away from football. Do you want to go to football? No, I don't want to go to football. Okay, we don't. Anyway, there's some people encouraged here today and some people discouraged. So let's just leave that alone today. Okay, but I was pastor in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and there was a young guy. I was a young pastor then, and a young guy in the church named Steve Jones. And Steve was he was a leader in the church, and he was also worked in radio. That was his line of work, was radio work. And so he actually worked at the University of Alabama. That's a little school there in Tuscaloosa. He worked at the University of Alabama in radio. And so he did all kinds of things, everything from DJing to programming and all kinds of stuff. But he knew all the people in there. Well, one of the things that happened for him was that I ended up seeing in our church a trail of people who knew him at work, and many of those were people very far away from God, disconnected from God, but through the way he lived his life and interacted with them, they would come to him with their difficulties or their troubles. He kind of had a whole ministry of people. He didn't go seeking them out, they sought him out, and a trail of people who actually came to faith as a result of him working in that environment. Now today he went into ministry, as you can kind of imagine. That was on his heart, and he's a very successful pastor in Michigan right now. Don't know how he lives up there in the wintertime, but coming from Alabama. But God's really, really blessing his ministry there. He's doing a great job and affecting more and more people for Christ. So, but here's a person who he didn't just do ministry. He wasn't a pastor at that time. He was just a lay guy. And I say just in the sense he was your typical person in the church, but he was a difference maker on his job. Now we have people here the same way, but I'm going to talk about how all of us, how any of us can be that in our job. And again, it's not the formulas you learn, it's the way you live. So let's talk about how we live, okay? Let's look at, first of all, Colossians chapter 3, and we're going to kind of walk our way through these verses. And I'm going to give you some words to maybe put beside the verses if you want to. Verse 23 of Colossians 3 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Even in this context, Paul was talking to people who were actually slaves. Not everybody was, but there were people in this church, in the church at Colossians, that was the Colossian church that were slaves. And he's saying, even if you find yourself in that situation right now, remember that do your work, do it as unto the Lord, what you're doing. You may not be excited about making your master richer, or sometimes in our world, you might, if you work for a big corporation, you might be thinking, well, the guy at the top's making all the money, and I'm just in here grinding it out. And Paul says, instead of looking at it that way, work as unto the Lord. Remember that someday you'll stand before God, you'll give an account for what you've done and how you've done it, and you in that process say, today, as I'm digging that hole, as I'm writing this paper, or as I'm doing whatever it is that I do, I'm doing it for God. And so remember ultimately who your real boss is. And so that doesn't mean that you disrespect your human boss, but it does mean that you understand. And here's what I want to say. If you do your work, if any of us do our work to honor God, it will typically please the boss. It's going to make them happy too. And so remember, whatever we do, we're really doing it as a service to God. We're saying, I'm doing this as unto you, as I'm working for you, not just individuals. Now, I'm going to go through some Proverbs here, and here's where you're going to get the words, okay? These Proverbs, actually, some of them are very pointed. Others, to me, they're pointed, but they're also even funny. Some of them are, and so not that this is like cracking jokes from Proverbs, but the Proverbs have a way of putting things that kind of like grab your attention. So the first one is, lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. He who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. So I want you to write down the word diligence. Diligence. And the question is, are you diligent in what you do? It's not a word we use every day, but I can tell you this. If your boss says about you, that guy is diligent, or that gal is diligent, that's a compliment, okay? That's a compliment. It's somebody who does what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. And I shared this with someone yesterday, I think, but I saw this meme or something where it said, I've trained my cat to do whatever it wants to do whenever it wants to do it. If you don't have a cat and never been around cats, you might think, what does that mean? If you've been around cats, you know. And I can tell you, cats are the most narcissistic animals in the world. It's all about them. And, they could just look at you and eat dirt and die or something, I don't really care as long as I can sleep on your bed, as long as I can eat the food you give out for me, when I want to eat it, how I want to eat it, whatever I want to do. So that's not being a diligent person is somebody who does what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and the way it's supposed to be done. A diligent person. Diligent person doesn't wait for someone to tell them the next thing to do. A diligent person is engaged. They're making things happen. They go after it. They don't wait for someone else. And if you think about it, even you see, and I say this, I'm really as a broad sweeping statement, and I'm really not knocking, because I'll be honest with you, most of us would really not want to do this job, because you may want to earn what they make sometimes, but you may not want to do the job, because it can be really, really hot in the summer, and Some days it's probably cold. But, road workers, if you ever have thought, man, it takes them forever to get that road done. I mean, why is this road under construction forever? I think I've figured out why it takes them that long to do it. It's because every time I drive by, they're having a committee meeting. Now, the committee meeting looks like this: hard hat, fluorescent vest, and a shovel in hand, and you're kind of leaning on the shovel and talking. Now, that's what it looks like. Now, I may be wrong, and I may be misread it or something like that, but it looks like they're having too many committee meetings around the shovels. Instead of scooping with the shovels, I'm not sure what. Now, I'm not being too hard on them, because I'm going to tell you, a hot summer day, I'm not being really hard on them all. But that's what it appears like to me. When I drive by and I see them having the shovel committee meetings, I'm not thinking, now that's a diligent bunch of workers right there. Now we're talking, that's a bunch of diligent, I don't. Now I will tell you this: when the UPS guy pulls up out front here, or gal, and they, wow, boom, and you hear boxes slamming around, and they come huffing through the door, they throw it down, sign right here, and before you even get finished signing, they're back out the door. I'm thinking, now that's a diligent worker. Now I don't, maybe they pay them to put on a good front. I don't know what it is, but I'm impressed. I'm like, I'm going, man, I'd be having a heart attack at the end of the day if it ran like that all day long, every day. I mean, and you see them. I mean, they drive crazy too. It does have that. I think it has an 800 number you can call if you don't like it, but it's on the back. But still, I mean, they go. And I'm not saying they do. I'm just saying they just take off. You're slamming in gear. So this is the difference between diligence and a lack of diligence. So I believe diligence gets people's attention. You say, well, I'm not trying to get people's attention. Guess what? If you're not diligent, you get people's attention too. People notice that too. So it's not just to impress people or please people, but it is to say it before God. Remember, we're talking about do it as unto the Lord. Audience of one. Diligence is important if you want to be a good ambassador. Second one is found in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. Honesty. Telling lies might get you out of trouble a time or two, and telling lies might actually, you might feel like you won by telling a lie. But at the end of the day, you will lose horribly, because as we know, trust isn't built overnight, but trust can be lost overnight. It can be lost in a second. And when you're honest, I think about this. You think about if you're choosing someone for a task in your company, or if a boss is looking for somebody to promote with more responsibility and maybe more income, they're not looking for someone who's dishonest. They're looking for someone who is honest. And honesty actually weighs in more. If you balance, you say, when they're balancing out all the different characteristics, this person's a hard worker, this person is this person is that, I can tell you honesty can be a deal breaker or not. And also, it'll have a lot to do with whether or not your coworkers believe in you or not, if you're honest or not. If you're always, found in lies, or in covering something up, or acting like it's somebody else's fault rather than yours, then that damages the reputation you have as an ambassador, which ultimately hinders people, if they know that you're an ambassador of Christ, from approaching Christ. The third one is Proverbs 12:9. Better to be a nobody and yet have a servant than pretend to be somebody and have no food. We live in a world where looking good really matters a lot. Image is really, really big. And if you've ever read one of the books like Millionaire Next Door, or those kinds of things, what's the latest one, Tom? Is it called Millionaire Next Door? No, Everyday Millionaire. Okay, that's the newest one out from Ramsey Ministries, and what what they tell you, what you find out in there is, everybody here, you know millionaires. You might even be a millionaire, before you're dead, before you're dying. But the fact is that the everyday millionaire typically is not a flashy person. They typically and so sometimes the flashiest people, they may have a good income, but they may be dying under the debt load of trying to keep up with the Joneses, And so their net worth is very low because of their debt load. And so whenever, this verse, when I read it, I thought of the book that Ramsey's had put out. It is, here you have somebody who actually has people working for them. They're doing just fine, but they're not on the front page of the paper. They're not somebody who's jet setting. They're not this or that or the other, but they're okay. They're doing just fine. But then you have somebody who's acting like they're somebody, went out, maybe just got him a new sports car or something. Nothing wrong with a new sports car. If you got one, that's fine. I'm not talking about that. But I'm saying someone who has one, but then they don't have enough food to eat. There's a problem, That's a problem. And so I'm going to call that humility. So somebody who you don't have to try to be something you're not. You don't have to pretend. Someone that's truly humble is content. Someone that's truly humble is a person that says, I don't have to let everybody know, flash everything I have and make it, make something splash everywhere I go. I don't have to do that. What I have to do is the next right thing and just be who God has made me to be. And I will tell you, a truly humble person is a person who puts God in his rightful place, understands who they are and who they're not, and respects other people with that same level of respect. That's what a true humble person is. So humility. I don't think anybody enjoys the person at work that comes in bragging all the time, that comes into work and all they're doing is talking about I, me, me, all the time. It's all about what I did, what I didn't, everything, all self-centered. A humble person respects, puts God in his rightful place, puts other people in the rightful place, keeps themselves in the rightful place. The next one is Proverbs 22, verse 1. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Reputation is the word for there. Reputation. And so my question is, do you know what your reputation is? Do you know how people view you, what they think of you? Do you know what your reputation is at work? Do people come to you? Do people shun you? Do people, are they glad you're a part of the team, or they wish you were transferred to another department? What is your reputation? A good name is more desirable. Are you the kind of person that someone come in and they're dealing with something and a coworker would say, hey, you need to go talk to this person, and you need to go talk to that person, and they can help you. What is your reputation? The next verse, Proverbs 22:29 says, do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. And this is excellence. Excellence. Do you do what you do with excellence? Or do you just get by? Getting by is getting by. And you might get by for a long time. But excellence puts things in a different way, a different place. And as the scripture says, someone that's really skilled in what they do oftentimes has an opportunity to actually be in the presence of people they would not normally be because of their excellence in their work. Proverbs 24, verse 27 says this, put your outdoor work in order and get your fields ready. After that, build your house. And I call that priorities. Sometimes if you've ever gotten the cart before the horse, that's pretty complicated, pretty hard to make it work. But if you do things in the right order, and we live in a world that says, get now and pay later, and in fact, you don't even have to pay for 6 months. That sounds really good, but that 6 months will go away, and then you've already used up your furniture, or it's like you already the dog peed on it twice, and now you're just now starting to pay for it. This is a pain in the neck. And so what is it? What is it that are the proper priorities? And you might say, I don't know the right priorities. If you don't know the right priorities, then I would encourage you to actually talk with somebody who can help you sort out priorities. And in the same sense that you want to be the person that people would say, hey, if I need help, I go to that person. I don't have time to get into personal stories, and I don't have permission this morning, but there are folks right here in this building, right here this morning, sitting here, who are that at work in their places, where people actually come to them and seek out. It doesn't have to do with work issues. It has to do with personal issues, things like that. They come and seek their counsel out. And just like the guy, Steve Jones, I was talking about, there's people like that right now in this room. And so, if you go, well, I'm struggling with this, struggling with my priorities and knowing how to put them in the right place, and then please come to me, and I can direct some traffic and set you up with some of these folks to give you some guidance on that, because we have some folks who really do a good job of that. The last one is the one that I think is actually, this is the comic strip in Proverbs, one of them. And I shouldn't love these verses, but I love these verses. And because they're so picturesque. It's like, if you could, someone's a good artist, you could do a good comic strip with this. A sluggard says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. In other words, I can't get up from where I am and go out and face the world. There's a bad lion out there. Now, do you know that there are things to fear when you take responsibility, when you're a diligent person and you go and you face it head on and you go after it? There are things to fear. But a diligent person faces those fears. And as we've kind of mentioned before, they're the kind of person who will eat the frog first, They'll and whatever's the toughest, tackle that and move on into your day. That's what a diligent person do. They're not going to sit back and make excuses. There's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. I just can picture somebody that's sounds like one of those crazy excuses that somebody would make. I can't go to work today because kind of things. And then verse 14, as a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. Back and forth, the door comes and goes. If someone's always turning their bed, that probably means they're not really getting much rest. But they're bound, determined to stay in that bed. The longer you stay in the bed, get a good night's sleep. Please do that. I'm not someone who would say, don't get a good night's sleep. I believe good night's sleep is healthy for you. But a person who won't ever get out of bed, and I know there are occasional times when someone might be dealing with a certain psychological challenge or something like that, or even a physical ailment where they're stuck in bed. We're not talking about that. Remember, the term here is sluggard. Sluggard. Have you ever seen a slug? Okay, you get the idea. A sluggard is just wallowing kind of in their own misery. And they don't have enough initiative to get up and get out of their own misery. Man, that's a picture. You can get that in your picture in your mind. 15. Now this one is the one that kills me. A sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. Now I'm just going to tell you, folks, if you're such a sluggard that you got some food there and you put your hand in the dish and you don't even have the energy to take it to your mouth, you are a real sluggard, folks. I'm just telling you, that's a bad, bad sluggard right there. If I ever, and I think probably the Solomon is being a little bit facetious almost, but what he's saying is, people don't realize how severe sluggardism will will cause your life to be. It's like self-destruction. It's like you're destroying yourself. One of the things that, I understand taking care of a family is a big, big responsibility. It's a hard responsibility. It's something that, can weigh on parents, weigh on a husband, weigh on a wife. It's a big responsibility. It is. But here's what I've also observed. To me, as hard as that might be sometimes to get up and kind of face the music, to get up and go through the work and be diligent and do whatever. Being a sluggard, I've observed a few sluggards in my life, and they make life so hard on themselves. So hard on themselves. I mean, you would rather sit there with your hand in the dish and be hungry than to spend the energy to take it to your mouth. I mean, I know that's an exact, it's like, for instance, that kind of thing. But that's what a person ends up, there's a basic responsibility you have to take care of yourself. That's a basic responsibility we all have. Take care of yourself. And if you can't take care of yourself, then it's really shameful then when people who can't take care of themselves take on other people. Because if you're not even taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of other people? But the truth is that this does happen. I mean, unfortunately, I read this and it's kind of comical to me, but there's a sad truth. This does happen. Now, I think I'm kind of talking to the choir here. I believe this is a very diligent group of people here this morning. And so I don't want to overburden us talking about the sluggard, but I do want to do the last verse here talking about the sluggard. Verse 16. A sluggard, and this is a sad verse. This isn't a funny verse to me. This is a sad verse. A sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 people who answer discreetly. That means this sluggard believes they have the corner on wisdom. Now, I'm going to tell you what. If you're delusional about your wisdom and your life is a wreck, and yet you think that you're smarter than 7 people who seem to be truly wise people, that's a real problem. And here's the word that I have here: self-awareness. Self-awareness. I will tell you this, that if we're not self-aware, we will mess up all kinds of things. If we don't know our limitations, if we don't know our abilities, if we don't know our responsibilities, and we don't take responsibility for those, and if we don't see our problem as our problem. See, someone like this is a person who thinks everybody else is the problem. If everybody else would just get on there, if everybody else would just do what they tell them to do, things would work out better. But the reason they're in the situation they're in is because this person didn't do that. That person let me down there. This person gave me a rough time here. This happened. My mom and dad dropped me on my head when I was a baby. I can't, whatever. But it's always somebody else's fault. And I'm going to tell you, as long as you think your life is somebody else's fault, you won't take care of yourself. And a person who is not self-aware, I mean, I will be the first to admit, some people have a very bad beginning. They have hard times. But I will also tell you this, I've seen people rise from those ashes, and take personal responsibility, even though everybody around them failed them in a certain way, maybe in their grown-up years. I've seen them become responsible people. And so self-awareness just simply says this: I understand my limitations, I understand my abilities. And I take personal responsibility for myself and my own actions and my own behavior. And don't turn that off on other people. Put that on blame on other people. And so, this morning, I believe if you are a good ambassador where you work, you'll be a person of diligence, a person of honesty, a person of humility, a person of good reputation, a person of excellence, and a person who has right priorities, and a person who is self-aware. And in order not to be that, it will hinder our ability to influence people as an ambassador of Christ. Let's pray.